Today is February 5th, 2024. Today, Disability Rights South Dakota is going to talk about some of the bills that we're watching up at the South Dakota Legislature. Last week, we released a video on several bills that we thought were interesting and were of note. I want to let you know that this week we're not necessarily going to be covering all of those bills. If you have any questions or are interested in some of the bills that we covered last time, you're certainly welcome to look back at that video and review some of the topics that were covered. If you want to find out what's happening with those bills now, you can go to southdakotalegislature.gov or sdlegislature.gov and look up the 2024 bills and see how they're progressing through the South Dakota Legislature and how they're being covered. There's audio recordings about committee hearings and different discussions that have happened in relation to that legislation. Or you can call it a Disability Right South Dakota at 1-605-224-8294, and we'd be happy to talk with you about those things. However, in this video, we're going to be covering some of the topics and legislation that we talked about last time. In addition, we'll be talking about some new legislation that's been proposed. So, let's get right into the bills that we're going to be talking about this week and see what's interesting up at the South Dakota Legislature. Here's a list of the bills that we'll be talking about this week. As we mentioned before, there'll be a number of bills that we'll be talking about this week that we covered last. However, some of the bills that we talked about last week, we're going to not be talking about and instead discuss some of the bills that have been brought up since our last video was provided. House Bill 1082 is a bit of a complex bill that changes the eligibility requirements and exempt value of a property tax for disabled veterans and surviving spouses. This bill would increase the exemption amount of a value of a dwelling or a home from $150,000 to $200,000 and adds an index factor to the statute so that the exemption amount automatically changes with inflation. This bill was referred to the House Military and Veterans Affairs Committee, where it was amended. Now it's been referred to the Senate Taxation Committee. That committee has not yet scheduled it for hearing. Next, we have House Bill 1085, which specifies the venue of an appeal to a circuit court for persons committed to a mental health facility. This bill adds a provision to an appeal for the commitment to the circuit court of the county in which the mental health facility is located if the appellant is committed to that facility. That means that if you, as a person who is committed to a mental health facility, wants to appeal that commitment, you don't necessarily have to go back to your county from which you came to make that appeal. You can appeal it in the circuit court in which the facility is located. This bill has passed through the House Judiciary Committee and has now been referred to the Senate for the Senate Judiciary Committee. They have not yet scheduled this for hearing, so keep an eye on that for scheduling with the Senate Judiciary Committee. House Bill 1093, to make an appropriation to provide a grant for the construction of a facility to provide certain health care and services. This bill would appropriate from the general fund a sum of $8 million to the Department of Social Services for the purposes of providing a grant to assist in the construction of a facility that would provide the following: specialty rehabilitation pediatric hospital, a specialty school for children under the age of 21, an intermediate care facility for children under 21, and outpatient rehabilitation pediatric services. This bill has been referred to the Joint Committee on Appropriations, but has not yet been scheduled or heard in that committee. House Bill 1138, establish a sales tax exemption for certain disabled veterans. An exemption from retail sales and service tax liability is what this bill purports to accomplish. This exemption would be from sales of tangible personal property, any product transferred electronically, and services to a veteran who is rated as permanently and totally disabled from a service-connected disability. The amount of gross receipts exempt under this chapter in a year for any veteran may not exceed $25,000. This bill has been referred to the House Taxation Committee and will be heard in room 464 tomorrow, Tuesday, February 6th from 7:45 to 9:45. House Bill 1144 would provide for the study of the Community, Hope, Opportunity, Independence, Careers, Empowerment, Success Waiver Program, also known as the Choices Waiver, and to provide appropriation therefor. This bill would appropriate from the general fund a sum of $450,000 to the Department of Legislative Audit for the purposes of hiring a contractor to study state and federal laws, regulations, and services relating to the operation and administration of the Choices Waiver Program within the Department of Human Services. It will be heard then in room 412 from 7:45 to 9:45. House Bill 1165, institute procedures for addressing the bullying of a student. This bill would establish procedures for educators to communicate with parents and collaboratively address issues of bullying in a school. This bill was referred to the House Education Committee and was tabled on Friday, February 2nd. What does that mean that it was tabled? That doesn't mean that the bill is dead. That would be as if it were sent to the 41st day. What that means is that the committee still holds on to this bill, but they decided not to discuss it any further. It's going to remain static in the committee unless the full body of the House orders the committee to send that bill to the floor of the House of Representatives where it can there be discussed by the full body. So as of right now, House Bill 1165 is sitting with the committee and will not be discussed any further, and is awaiting the full House to ask to hear it in that body, if anything's going to happen with it. House Bill 1202. This establishes procedures for the termination of services by a provider through the Choices Waiver Program. This is a bill that Disability Rights South Dakota is watching very closely. We do have concerns in this bill. This bill purports to limit the time from which a person would appeal a termination to the completion of that appeal. So the person only has a certain amount of time to conduct an appeal until the termination becomes effective, even if that appeal is not yet complete. It also limits the basis for which an appeal can be requested. Under this bill, an appeal can only be based on procedural grounds. And in some cases, termination of Choices Waiver provider supports are immediate, subject to only certain notice requirements. This bill has been referred to the House Health and Human Services Committee and has not yet been scheduled for hearing. If you have questions about this bill or would like to discuss ways in which you may be able to get involved, give us a call, and we'd certainly like to discuss this with you. House Bill 1220, allow an appeal of a decision of the Department of Education regarding special education or related services by a civil action against the department. This bill reads that any party aggrieved by a decision of the Department of Education under this chapter may bring a civil action with respect to a due process complaint requesting a due process hearing under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA. A civil action may be filed in either state or federal court without regard to the amount in controversy. The party bringing the action has 30 days from the date of decision to file a civil action with either the federal or state courts. This bill has been referred to the House Judiciary Committee and has not yet been scheduled for hearing. House Bill 1230, amend provisions regarding the reports to be done for guardianship or conservatorship and provide a penalty therefor. Many of you may well know that guardians and conservators are required to report the status of their guardianship or conservatorship every year. However, there's no penalties for failing to do so. A guardian must provide to the court what is called a report. A conservator must provide an accounting. Under this bill, a person who knowingly provides false or misleading information in a writing is guilty of a Class 2 misdemeanor. So if you lie in that report or audit or accounting, you'd be in violation of this statute, in which case that would be a Class 2 misdemeanor. This has been referred to the House Judiciary Committee and has not yet been scheduled for hearing. House Bill 1241, modify the amount of time allowed to an employee to vote at any election in this state. So right now, employees of a business, of a company, of the state are provided, or there's a protection that says you have 2 hours to go vote in a state or federal election. What this bill would do would extend that from 2 hours to 4 hours and provides protections from an employer for taking some sort of adverse action against an employee for a person wanting to go vote in state or federal elections. This bill has been referred to the House State Affairs Committee and has not yet been scheduled for hearing. Now we're on to the Senate bills. Senate Bill 28, modify tax refunds for elderly persons and persons with a disability, and to make appropriation therefore, and to declare an emergency. The sum of $425,000 to the Department of Revenue for providing refunds for real property tax and sales tax to elderly and disabled persons. A portion of the appropriated sum, not to exceed $20,000, may be used for administrative costs of this act. Refund percentages are dependent on household, single or multiple households. The Senate referred Senate Bill 28 to the Senate Committee on Appropriations. That committee referred the bill to the Joint Committee on Appropriations, and the Joint Committee amended Senate Bill 28 and then passed it unanimously. Senate Bill 46, authorized the disclosure of referral status by the Department of Human Services personnel. This bill states that except as otherwise provided in state law, the Department of Human Services may disclose information to referring individuals and entities for the purpose of relaying the status of their referral. This increases transparency and information to people making a referral for services, so that they can know what the status of that referral is. The important thing to note about this is that it would not allow for unnecessary PPI, or personally protected information, to be provided to that referrer. This has been passed by the Senate, uncontested, and it was sent over to the House of Representatives. The House has referred the bill to the House Health and Human Services Committee, who has not yet scheduled the bill for hearing. Senate Bill 99, modify provisions pertaining to applying for an absentee ballot application. So recently, certain voting offices have changed their hours of operation. Those hours, when they were changed, the timelines available to provide an application for an absentee ballot weren't changed along with those office hours changes. So what this bill would do would be to change the ability to provide an absentee application to match the office hours. Senate Bill 99 was first read in the Senate on January 19th and referred to the Senate States Affairs Committee. That committee amended the bill, passed it, and placed it on the consent calendar for consideration in bulk from the South Dakota Senate. The Senate removed that from the consent calendar, discussed it with the full body on the Senate floor, but then ultimately passed it and sent it over to the House. The House has referred this bill to the House States Affairs Committee, where it has not yet been scheduled for hearing. Senate Bill 119, permit the use of tribal identification cards when registering to vote. This bill adds tribal identification card as a valid form of ID within the South Dakota election and defines valid tribal identification card. This bill was sent to the Senate State Affairs Committee. That committee amended the bill to add language which states, at the request of a federally recognized Indian tribe located wholly or partially within the state, the Secretary of State shall inform the tribe of the criteria needed to enter into a memorandum of understanding to allow the tribal identification card number to be used on the application for voter registration. With that amendment in place, the bill was passed unanimously by the committee and placed on the Senate's consent calendar. However, the legislation has been removed from the consent calendar and will be debated by the full Senate chamber. This debate has not yet occurred, and the next thing you'll hear from this bill is a discussion by the South Dakota senators on the floor of the Senate. Senate Bill 186. Modify provisions pertaining to the voting rights of members of an Indian tribe. This bill is a hog house or vehicle bill, which means that there is no language in the body of the bill. It's just a placeholder. This language will be added later as the discussion is developed. It was referred to the Senate States Affairs Committee, where it was scheduled for hearing on February 2nd, but no action was taken in that committee hearing. As of today, no action has been taken on this bill and has not yet been scheduled for hearing in subsequent committee hearings. Senate Bill 209, make an appropriation for grants to assisted living centers and nursing facilities for costs related to telemedicine. This act is meant to appropriate $5 million in federal fund expenditure authority for the expenditure of State Fiscal Recovery Fund American Rescue Plan Act monies to the Department of Health for purposes of providing grants to assisted living centers and nursing facilities, licensed according with South Dakota law, to purchase and install technology and infrastructure for telemedicine. So basically, it would allow certain assisted living centers and nursing facilities that are licensed to install technology so that they can provide telemedicine services to people that aren't receiving services right there at that location. This bill has been referred to the Senate Health and Human Services Committee, but has not yet been scheduled for hearing with that body. Finally, Senate Joint Resolution 501. Again, resolutions are statements made by the legislative body, and if passed, even if passed, don't hold the full force and effect of law. In this case, the Senate is resolving or proposing and submitting to the voters at the next general election an amendment to the Constitution of the state of South Dakota, authorizing the state to impose work requirements on certain individuals who are eligible for expanded Medicaid. Why is this important to people with disabilities? Because this amendment would exempt certain individuals, including those who have been diagnosed with a physical or mental disability, from this work requirement. Senate Joint Resolution 501 has been referred to the Senate State Affairs Committee, where it was passed out of that body on a 7-1 vote. Having passed through that committee, it was brought to the full body of the Senate, who also passed it. The bill has now crossed over to the House, who has referred the matter to the House Senate Affairs Committee. That committee, the House State Affairs Committee, has not yet scheduled this bill for hearing. So as you can see here, here's a list of the bills that we discussed today. If you have any questions over the bills that we've been discussing here today, please give us a call at Disability Rights South Dakota, 1-605-224-8294. And until next week, have a good one and continue advocating. Thanks.